Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Sequel Q&A. My name's Doug. So the next sequel that we're going to be covering is a sequel that I believe has the greatest sequel title in history, House 2, The Second Story. And for it, I chatted with set decorator Don Diers. Don was amazing. Before we even chatted, just our emails back and forth, I felt like it was going to be pretty special. And he was so kind to send me a hat from Tenacious D's Pick of Destiny. And it was so sweet because he sent it in a petty cash envelope, which I think was so cool. So at the top of the interview, that's what you're going to hear us going right into that, because we were starting the conversation. I was like, oh, this is good. Let me start recording. So it was really cool that he did that. And we talked about how, they always say sometimes when you're a kid, the things that you do can bleed into what your career is going to be. And for him, it was. His dad had a construction company, Diers Construction, and him and his brother, they loved to make like haunted houses. And his mother was a painter. So you have the painting, you have the construction, him and his brother doing these haunted houses that they put on to raise money. And boom, what's he go into? He goes into, art. He goes into decorating on sets. So many amazing things that goes into the job he does now were things that he was doing at a younger age, but you just never know what it's going to be. And we talked about how Don accidentally got moved. When he went to UCLA, which we talk about, and he has a mutual friend that's good friends with Lee Herrenberg, a guest from a few months back. And he also went to school at the same time as Kyle Gass, one member, the other member of Tenacious D, not named Jack Black. So he was doing like improv, amazing stories about a show that him and his improv team had, his improv group, which is, it needs to be a real thing. When you hear him talk about it, you'll agree. And how he was, he left his art out and somebody saw it. He got moved to the art department, working on a little film called Nightmare on Elm Street, and the rest is history. We talk about Soul Man. We talk about what a grueling project was for him to work on Biodome. Set decorators, because he talks about how often people call them set directors, but we talk about the Set Decorator Society of America, which is near and dear to his heart, and what goes into that whole process of decorating a set and what each of the jobs, does. So we covered a lot. We covered a lot of stuff, and he talks about really cool mementos that he kept. And the one that I'll spoil right now, because it's usually something we discussed at the end of the interview, he's watching House 2 to prepare, like after we talked to him, we scheduled the time. He goes, oh, let me watch it. He sees chairs that are in his basement because he collects a lot. You'll hear it all. But do me a favor, if you're new here, please subscribe, like, follow us on all social media at Sequels Only. Go on YouTube, subscribe there. Tell your neighbor about us. Tell them about Don, because after this interview, you're going to want to tell everyone. You're going to want to listen to it again. Lots of fun. Love Don, and I'm going to shut my yapper so you can hear this week's guest, set decorator Don Diers.
Tenacious D. I'm glad it got there in time.
You know what's even cooler? Like, this is awesome, but even the envelope I thought was really cool. Do you have like a bunch of these just lying around, or is that from you had it in there? But I just love that it says 20th Century Fox Television. That's cool.
So those are old school petty cash envelopes, and of course, I love paper. I'm a saver of everything, right? So okay, I love paper, and one of the things that I've saved, which doesn't take up that much room, is those envelopes. And those are petty cash envelopes. I kind of sent it to you because you said you were an accountant.
Oh, yes, I am. Yeah. That's really cool.
Anyway, so I just thought I would include that because I was bringing it to the shipping store. So anyway.
That's awesome. No, I appreciate it. So, Don, this would be a lot of fun. I love talking with people to figure out like why they got into this crazy game of Hollywood, because it's a very unique career. You know, it's different type of job. It's not a 9 to 5 job. So, where did it all begin? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Northern California. My parents both moved to California from Iowa,
Oh,
and
okay.
they're sort of salt of the earth, hardworking Midwesterners. And my mother was a painter and an artist, but a homemaker, and my father was a carpenter and had a construction company called Diers Construction, which was my father and his brother, my uncle Vince, and ultimately my older brother Steve, my brother Phil, and myself became
Okay.
Deers Construction. Um, my older brother went to college and studied something else. My other brother Phil studied and got a film degree at San
Oh,
Francisco
wow.
State, and because of in our childhood, like my father, who wasn't an artist necessarily, but liked having a camera, had Super 8 and 8 millimeter cameras around. And my brother Phil's kind of ingenious, kind of person to figure stuff out, technical and sort of. Anyway, so he was able to figure out like, oh, how to load the camera, and then eventually how to do pixelation. And then
Oh,
he
wow.
ended up building a matte box in front of our cheesy little Super 8 camera, and figured out old school 8 millimeter. You could back wind it because there was a spool. Super 8 was in a cartridge and you couldn't mess with it as much, or it wasn't as easy to figure out. So we ended up doing
Yeah.
all these like goofy little movies based on whatever we'd seen, including things like we went to Disneyland as kids and saw, like this thing called Pepper's Ghost. I don't know if you know the term for that, but it's like a
No,
trick
what's
thing.
that?
Do you know what that is?
No, no.
Pepper's Ghost is basically just a reflection. And so when you're going through the ride and those guys are sitting with you, it's done with mirrors, literally, or a piece of reflected glass. And those guys are up there, and the glass is tilted at 45, and you're
Wow.
looking at the glass from your cart, and it's reflecting that. I don't know how he figured that out, but anyway, that leads me to the next thing, which is we ended up putting on. We got so inspired by the Haunted Mansion that we ended up putting on spook houses for the American Cancer Society
Oh,
for
wow.
years. And again, my mother was a saint because she was so tolerant of us being creative and, making movies, and then eventually making spook houses, and then again making movies, and kind of always putting on a show.
Yeah.
So
She help you guys
anyway,
paint?
that was
Did
say
she?
what?
Did your mom get involved, like with the painting of the spook houses or anything?
She always was advising. She wanted to, and yeah, she probably did. I remember at times in my childhood, you'd come home from school and the teachers would give you some creative project, and she would sort of like, "Oh, let me show you," and take it out of your hands and halfway kind of do half of it for you, and then say, "Oh, do you
Yeah.
understand now?" And you're like, "Yeah, after you finished it, Mom." No, she loved all the kind of, I went to kind of Northern California in the 70s was a little touchy feely. And every school I went to was brand new because we were in suburbia. And so I had the benefit of like, if you don't want, you can make a movie for your English project kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I took full advantage of that. And, I had one class which was, analyzing Marshall McLuhan, this is in junior high and high school. So I think that environment of sort of a creative universe, very much supported by the schools that we went to, and then my brother's genius, and what was going on in the world in a way, like the films of the 70s started changing too,
Yeah.
and based on even the films of the 60s, when finally, like from the French New Wave, cinematographers and directors were taking the camera off the tripod and traveling it because they were lighter. And I think that kind of ease that maybe reflected in cinema at the time made it just feel like, like we were fearless. If we can make, animated clay movies like we made one that was called, it was all done with clay characters called Stairs to Scares or Ghosts for Hosts. And
Wow,
it's sort of
that's
based
awesome.
on Toby Bullwinkle sort of titles, because they always had those kind of titles on Bullwinkle.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and we just, we screwed around with the camera a lot. And yeah, and my father, because my father was a carpenter, he allowed both my brother and I access to his workbench. So we both had sort of that background of being able to make things with tools and being taught how, and then the ability of maybe painting things because of my mother's paint set. So, that all kind of came full circle in my career.
Yeah. And what was the first, so what was the next step? Obviously you're doing your own stuff. Did you start working with other directors or doing anything for plays?
You know what? I knew I wanted to go to school. I had in junior high, I'd written a letter to Francis Ford Coppola and asked him what am I supposed to do to become a director? Like, I thought I'd be a director. Everybody who goes to film school thinks they're going to be a director. And I'm like, and he sent back and he answered and he's like, I went to UCLA film school and I studied this. And I think he might have said he had taken drama. And so as I graduated from high school, I went to junior college in Northern California and took theater, and I took directing on camera, and I became a stage manager, and eventually I directed theater up north, and all of that played into, come to find out, at the UCLA application for the film school, they don't just let anybody in. They kind of wanted a sort of humanities kind of breadth of information, and so they wanted to see art and sculpture and scripts and then to find out they wanted to know if you had directed and are you okay of being around actors and whatever. And I had, and I knew that would help out. And thankfully, because I only applied to UCLA Film School, it was the only college I applied. Dumb luck, I got accepted. I was very lucky, and so it becomes a whole new world when you suddenly are in a bigger pond with very talented other people who also made Super 8 movies ever since they were kids, right? Like every nerd that showed up at UCLA had some kind of background like that. And fun fact, at the same time I was at UCLA, Tim Robbins and Lee Ehrenberg were there too. And I saw that you interviewed Lee for the actor from
Pirates. That's really funny.
It's funny how some of these things go full circle. I also was at the junior college while I was in theater. I was in theater with Kyle Gass, who is one of the two of Tenacious D.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So some of these things, again, whatever reason, whether you're looking for links or not, became sort of full circle.
Oh, no, they come up like crazy. Like, it's so funny in the behind the scenes jobs like yourselves, like, that's where there seems like more of a community. When I've talked to people, it's like I'll mention somebody that has a ton of credits, but not a lot of people know by name. And then they're like, oh yeah, I know him. I worked with him, or he gave me a job one time. So there's like definitely a community. Special effects, there's like there was like all those little crews and they all like know each other. It's like pretty fascinating. But yeah, and we don't look for the connections, but they're just there.
They are there. And so, like I teach, and I told you that in the email too, and I tell students like, hang out with the people you're making movies with in school very likely might get you your first job. And that is what happened. This friend of mine, Aaron Warner, who went on to produce big movies, was 6 months ahead of me and started working on bad horror films and got me my first job on that, and I'm cleaning toilets. I'm both driving the lead actress, Lisa Pelican, to her house back and forth as a PA, and then I'm like plunging toilets in this decrepit mansion called the Waddles Mansion. Because, you like, wash your hands before you get in the car with her. But, so yeah, I cut my teeth doing bad horror films at first, and including, those were all part-time jobs, although I worked on Ghoulies and Critters.
Oh, cool.
A Nightmare on Elm Street, I was in the office, and, I'm an artsy guy, and I'm running scripts and getting coffee and taking film to the lab or whatever, PA does. And I left some of my artwork on the copy machine and somebody found it and they're like, you should be in the art department. And so they literally took me away from this woman, Lisa Cook, who was the coordinator on the film. She's like, Lisa, Don's in our department now. And
really?
and you know, I didn't even know what was going on, but this decorator on the film, the production designer was a guy, Greg Fonseca, carried me under his wing for many movies, and the decorator
Wow.
on that movie was like, "Hey Don, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know, whatever you tell me." And she's like, "There's a painting, and Freddie's going to catch on fire in front of this painting, and we don't have doubles on it. Can you reproduce that painting before 5 o'clock?" Oh, yeah, sure. There's paints under the
Whoa.
staircase, and I like, you know, oh, really, free paint? Like, you know, everything about movies is so, you know, and that was a cheap movie, but you know, there's the stuff's there to be creative. The stuff's there to, if you want to do it, and certainly if you want to work hard. Anyway, that was how it all began. That's so non-union
Wow, that
movies.
is insane. So you
Yeah,
left it so obviously you were working with what was that first horror film that your friend from class got you on? That was like the Critters and the Ghoulies.
that was Ghoulies. They'll get you
Okay.
in the end. Do you remember that one where the guy's coming
Yes.
out of the toilet?
Okay,
So
no, so
stupid.
so that's crazy. So you leave your art by mistake and the rest is history pretty
The
much.
rest is history,
Wow.
and it is. It's funny how they're like little sort of jumping off, or little like a rocket has a little propeller and it sends you off to the next thing, you know. And that was the first one. And again, I had no idea what a dope. I had done sets for theater, and I didn't know this was a job
Yeah.
in the movie business. Um, and you know, like I say, fell into it. And so um, the so I did like, I don't know, good amount of movies, art directing, and on-set dressing for Greg and Anne. And you know, on-set dressing is a really good place to start because the set is already made and dressed, and all you have to do is keep continuity. And so,
Oh,
you
so
know,
that's a job. That's all. So that's what an on-set dresser is. Because oh man, that's tough.
yeah, you are one of one, or maybe the only person, but in those years the prop people would help you. There was this transition when I finally got in the business. It was almost like they invented this position because they realized we needed it. And
Yeah.
I'm not even sure the union still even recognizes it. It's always a credit in films, but you know, it's under set dresser as opposed to on set dresser. And
Wow.
what was great about it for me is that I finally got to be in Hollywood by watching directors set up each shot and then execute it. The DP asking me to, you know, close the window blinds or fix the sheets, or wasn't the telephone on the receiver over there in the previous shot. Like your continuity interview, very much I could relate to her
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you have to keep your eyes of continuity on the actors. You're trying not to keep your eyes on like every dumb little piece of furniture in the room, right?
Yeah.
So you know, when camera moves from that corner to this corner, you put that corner back together and make this corner look good. And I did that. And I remember on one movie I did that was called Static, and it was this weird art film that was about this guy who invented a TV you could see heaven. And you know, it was Amanda Plummer and Keith Gordon, and
Oh, okay.
um, I am on set dressing, and I would run in and like Keith gets out of bed or something, and I would run over in the scene and I would style the sheets of his bed so it looked like a Caravaggio painting or some classic because I was an art nerd, you know, like it's got to
Yeah.
look beautiful in every shot. And the director and the first AD would love, Don, get out, you know, like it doesn't have to look like a Caravaggio painting. It's not about the sheets. So you kind of again learn about, in a big way you learn uh, all the kinds of things that are important to the DP, to the lighting, to editing, continuity. And again, since I'd gone to film school, I understood the importance of continuity and being able to cut back and forth between characters. And so it was at my second film school was doing non-union horror films and low budget films.
Wow, that is awesome. So what is the order on set? So it's on set dresser and then there's set dresser and then is art director.
Yeah,
Is it in that sense?
it starts with the production designer who gets a head credit on the film, so you may not see them in the role at the end. Production designers sometimes will design both wardrobe and the all the sets. More in contemporary worlds, not so much, but like Catherine Martin, Baz Luhrmann's wife, is that kind of production designer. She designs
Okay.
costumes and stuff. But mostly a production designer means that they're designing the entire production. And that includes choosing the locations, being involved in the props, if not, overseeing them, but being approving of them. And under the production designer within their department is a art director, assistant art director, and what I always get called, which is wrong, is a set designer. So set designer is like an architect. They draw everything. The art
Oh,
directors
okay.
oversee the set designers and all the locations, all the construction, all the paint. And the construction coordinator is right in there too, if it's a big enough film, which most shows build sets. And so this construction coordinator is also in that club with the art department. And they run painters and sign makers, and then they jive with special effects, which is another department. And then my department, which I ended up 10 years into my career, decided kind of after Biodome to no longer art direct again. And I started set decorating. And so set decorators are their own department and run that department. And basically, we fill out the character. If every single room on Earth was built and was a set, the walls, the architecture, the windows, the doors, the floor would be the art department. And every single item that fills a room would be the set decorator. So it's a huge job, and what it's also about is the details and fleshing out character with objects, so that that's communicated. And sometimes there's no character. Sometimes you're doing offices. Sometimes you're doing a morgue. You're doing strange sets. I remember one day Greg Fonseca told me on House 2. He said, Dawn, meet me at this place tomorrow. We're doing a pterodactyl nest. And we go, that doesn't happen often. So I'm glad I didn't go into interior design, because I'd be doing bathrooms and kitchens and bedrooms. Thankfully, in this world, which again, I love film. I didn't have a plan B, so I'm glad it worked out. And same with set deck, in that what happened is, I think again on Biodome kind of just was like, okay, this isn't a good fit. And I was on Red Rock West, and the set decorator was in one of the sets, and she was going into voices. It was like she was talking as the characters, and she was dressing the set and putting things in different places and, figuring it out. And she was doing it kind of in character. And I was like, the light bulb went off, and I'm like, that's how I always do voices, and I'm always doing that kind of thing. Like, and I've always like in the 70s, I was going to thrift stores and always curious. I would buy stuff from the 50s, and I was curious, like the people who own things, and I would create backstories. So it was an ideal fit.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah,
it worked out.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So what was it about Biodome? Was it just like too much?
Well, yeah. I mean, so I had art directed plenty of movies before that had budgets.
Oh, yeah.
And even movies that didn't have such big budgets, but didn't have such an enormous appetite. Again, Biodome is the lead character. It is the title of the film. And as production designer Michael Johnston told me the other day, he said, they were thinking they were making something like Dumb and Dumber or some kind of like contained show, when in the script it talks about each of the pods that they're in, and it's a forest, or it's the tropical, or it's the desert. Yeah. I mean, how do you, and they wanted us to do it in party tents, like rent those vinyl white party tents. Like, but then they were going to cut to like an exterior of at the beginning of the film, there's the water reclamation place where they cut the ribbon and all that. So if that's the exterior of it, and they get locked in, and now we're in a party tent.
Yeah.
Right. So, recently some friend of mine told me, I was talking about how just how films and television kind of get out of hand with the money and so on. And he said, oh yeah, now they're having outside firms generate the budgets of how much you're supposed to spend. And I'm like, this is like, getting further and further away from the person you should be asking how much the price of beans are. Like, I know how much a mattress in a box springs rents for, or whatever. we've been doing it for a good amount of time. So I think they were. I would say they were definitely over their head in what they had written. And Michael Johnston and I and Carl Sable, the other art director, and Carl was in charge of the more technical parts of art directing. So the drafting and hiring a firm to take care of structural engineering because it needed to be stand up and not blow over in the wind.
Yeah.
So, and I was more in charge of, softer things at that time. But I think what I came out of that movie with is I was one day I was on set and I was exhausted because I was working with the greens crew, and the greens crew were there making it look like each of these pods. So the forest would look like a forest, the farm set would look like a farm, the desert looks like a desert, and we shot on a union lot. So we're a non-union film shooting on a union lot, and we have basically PAs helping be the greensmen and digging holes for hundreds of plants. And I'm up there with them because when you rent a location on the back lot, you're the one who makes it look like what you want to look like, right? And it's just what it is. And so we wanted it to be these biodome look. And I'm out there because we're trying to meet a deadline. I'm up there helping the greens crew dig day in day out. I'm sunburned. I got blisters. My feet have blisters. And I'm in the lunch line one day during shooting, and Steve Sabler, the producer, comes up to me and he says, "Michael told me you're supposed to be watching the budget." And I'm like, "I'm watching my blisters. Like I am like literally manual labor on this show. We're so undercrewed." And that was kind of the point where I was like, I don't want to be blamed for this. I'm not even great at this, like that wasn't my strength. So I kind of was like, okay, this is the last time I'm doing this.
Yeah, that looked like it costs a lot of money. And obviously when there's a time frame, you have to spend more money to get it done sooner. And wow, what happened to it after the movie? Did you ever, was it like torn down right away or
disassembled? The whole thing was disassembled. And I don't know, did we recycle the all that metal work? I mean, it was, if you see, because that's why I sent you the photos.
Those pictures are awesome. Those are so cool.
And that just kind of give you a reference of what we do behind the scenes, but also the massive task of creating this superstructure over Upper and Lower Falls, which is like a whole hillside on the Universal backlot.
Yeah, that's insane.
And then we shot in the desert, and we built this desert pod as a separate pod out in the desert, which was not small, as you can see from the photos as well.
Yeah.
And it was hot out there. Oh my God. Lancaster in spring and summer is awful. And but it's very convincing. Like our part of the show is to do the physical sets, and then you see the post-production. They did add-ons to make it look like that pod in the desert. You could see the rest of it, and then they used the model too, which I sent you photos of as well, which are also convincing. Like you buy it.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. And so now, you graduate. When did you graduate? I guess like 82, 83.
I graduated 83, stuck around. I graduated 83. I got into UCLA in 80, and you're supposed to be out in 2 years. But, when you have your own editing room, it's hard to pry you out of there. So I stuck around in 83. And then I started working on little parts of movies as a PA. And then by 84, I did Nightmare on Elm Street. And that was the year of the Olympics, too. So we were at this studio on Cahuenga called Renmar Studios, and it was part of the old Desilu, old studios. And we had a time frame because what was called the Olympic Arts Festival was coming, and they needed these stages for sort of Cirque du Soleil performances of things they were doing that was part of the Olympics cultural program they were doing. So we all were afraid of the Olympics that year. And it was like what we called Carmageddon here, where everybody was afraid when the 405 closed down. Everybody just stayed at home. During the Olympics, a lot of us left town. And Catherine Hardwicke, the director of 13 and some of the, what are the vampire movies called again?
The Twilight movies?
Twilight. She directed the Twilight movies.
Oh, wow.
I went to film school with Catherine, and she invited a bunch of us to escape the Olympics. And we went to Mexico and we made this movie called The Night with the Iguana Women, which did not come out. Like, again, bad exposure on, people like me who are not technical. So, but we had a great time, and, we escaped the Olympics.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
that's when
No,
I started. It was a good
cool.
time to get into Hollywood.
Oh, yeah. No, I was asking because tape heads in 88, was it like, oh, hey, Lee or Tim, or did you guys keep in contact between then?
Catherine did. Catherine,
Oh, okay.
much better at that than me. And so, again, I went to film school with Catherine. In fact, I'm in one of her student films. She had been an architect before she went to film school, graduates about the same time I do, starts doing shows, and contacts me. And because I had started to get a few credits in the art department and art directing, set deck. I don't think I'd set decorated. And she recruited me. And I don't know why. Like, Lee Ehrenberg got in, I think, because of Tim, and because
Yeah, he
Tim
said
was
that's what he said. Yeah.
yeah, the Actors Gang. And so there were a couple of those groups that, again, I talk about these things come full circle. I was in one of those too. The people I went to film school with, we all graduated, and we were like, oh my God, it's sort of like it's pitch, and it's you got so much going on when you're in film school, and all of a sudden it ends and you're like waiting for the phone to ring, or you're on a show and it's dull because you're a PA on walkie-talkie or whatever. And we started this improv group called Improvateria Presents.
Oh,
And
nice. I love improv.
we had a half-hour show that was on public access. So it was super low budget and really cheesy. And I have to tell you, it was vaudeville, because the acts that came before us and after us were eye-rolling, bizarre. Like, there was a psychic, there was a really bad Hollywood celebrity guy named Skippy Lowe who had a show. And we ended up doing these shows and started developing characters. And again, it's live TV. So we would walk off camera and then give the other person your lavalier mic, because it was so low budget, not everybody could have a mic. So that kind of stuff was worked into blocking. And
that's awesome. What did you guys do? Short form or long form?
We did short form live. We did several shows. We did this one called Irma Kramp's Coffee Klatch, where we were all in drag. So I was in television very early doing drag. And then we did a show called The God Club, which was a parody of the religious television shows where there was a husband and wife.
That's a great idea.
Every week we would play different characters who were guests on The God Club.
Oh man, why don't they do that now? That'd be that's a great idea, that improv show, to do each week a different thing, and then for that 30 minutes you're improvising a show, like a basic genre. That's awesome.
It was great. And then all of us were talented film people, and so by the end we did it for 3 years. It was pretty exhausting, because every month we would show up, we'd rehearse for ahead of time, and then they gave us a show. They gave us a slot which was coveted, and we got an hour show. So we got 2 hours of studio time. So we got a half hour to set up, an hour of shooting time, and a half hour to strike. And we decided to do a show that we ended up we called it the Friday Night Theme Show, because we couldn't think of what else to call it. And that way we could just have themes every week. And each one of us produced a show. And so I did a show that was all about fish, because I was into fish at the time, and I had fish on my resume, and I would put a fish on every set. Like, that was my thing for a minute. And so we would just every week we would just shoot sequences for our show. Like, somebody else did one that was, another subject, like cavemen. And so within the shooting of the 1 hour show, we'd be doing fish characters, and then we'd be off stage changing into our caveman characters, and then come back on. And then we'd cut it we had a friend who had an editing room. So then that show was actually not live when we cut it, and had theme music, and we did a whole opening sequence with us, like, every actor on every TV show, where you get your little cameo in the front. Name we always were doing absurdist stuff, and I don't know. That was a great time. Yeah.
But, do you have any records of that? Do you have any tapes, or is it anywhere?
Yeah, I think the producer who got us the slot, this guy Art Mandrala, who became an editor, has, I think, the masters, most of the masters.
Oh, that's rad.
And my good friend Frank Raywald and I kept the 3/4 inch tape from the 80s. So I don't know how long it's going to last. I think it degenerates at some point. But a fun fact, those slides I sent you, I mean, those photos I sent you were slides I took in 95 because that's what I was shooting. And I found a guy in the valley here to transfer him. And he's like, oh, he's kind of a Russian guy. He's like, I can transfer anything you have. And I'm like, oh, I have VHS. I have 3/4. Anything you have, I can transfer. So now that I discovered this guy, I might start to pull those tapes out.
That is so cool. I was shocked when I talked to, and I know it was that boom of the mid 80s when like SNL was doing that weird transition, like when Lorne was gone and they had like the bad years and they just had every young actor in Hollywood. Like I didn't realize until like 2 weeks ago that Anthony Michael Hall was only like 17 or 18 on SNL, which is pretty insane for a young kid to be exposed to everything that went on like at night or the after party at like that young of an age. But when he told me that when Lee told me him and Tim got flown out to audition, I was like floored. But then I was like, because they didn't do any stand up. They had some characters from like the shows that they did, but he was saying it was just, they were trying to take every hot young up and coming talent and try to get them early. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. I flown out to New York to do the audition in front of everyone. But, man, that's so cool that you did improv. That's great.
It helps, I think what it does is it helps that, first of all, I don't want to be an actor. I'd realize that too, and so you have empathy for the actors now too. But you also understand that if something goes wrong on the camera's rolling, and if you're in character, you can do anything, or you at least have a vocabulary of a few things you can pull from, and yeah, it did help round me out, and it was more fun than anything. I wasn't doing it to become famous or anything. We were having fun making our shows.
Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
Yeah, I was in Portland, and Portland had a big improv scene, and I've always loved improv, like Who's Line or UCB. And I took classes, and it was like the coolest 2 classes I've ever took in my life. It was just so much fun every week. It was just, it's a team sport, which is like something you don't think of when you think of like acting, but you trust the other person that you're going to do something, and I hope you're going to follow me, because if not, it's going to get a little awkward.
And that's it. I think, they say in improv, the answer is always yes and. And so when you say supporting the other actor, it's never know that you're wrong and then you derail the conversation. And I think even for what we do now, and just taking it again sort of to where I'm at now, is the script says one thing, and then the director says another thing, and then the producer says another thing, and then the production designer says another thing. And all that for me, again, I'm under all those people, is yes, and here's how I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Because, you don't want to say, oh, I can't do that. That's so hard.
We'll find somebody that will say yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I think that if you're not a hardworking and positive yes kind of person in showbiz, I think you don't make it as far. The phone doesn't ring as often.
No, agree. Because people want to hire people they like. You can have 3 people interview for the same job. One person can be super qualified, one not so qualified. But if you like the not so qualified guys, you're going to want to hang out with them after work. If the person has the best qualifications, and that's just how it is. It's like, life is that popularity contest. They say that it isn't in high school.
Yeah. Well, and also, there's solitary positions, editing and writing. And if you aren't like, sort of outgoing, but, you understand this part. I have great respect for the screenwriters because, again, that's where it all comes from. It comes off the page.
Yeah.
And I don't have that ability. I'm not a writer. I grew up dyslexic and didn't even know it until I was in film school. And I was making this movie. We were doing live TV at the time. It was, again, early 80s, and we were doing rock videos. And I worked with this, my professor was Shirley Clark. She was an experimental filmmaker from New York. And I made this live dance performance where I had 4 cameras going, and I told one camera to be wide and on the other 3 cameras just to focus on like the arms and the legs. And I made this thing live called Dancing Video Puzzle, where I basically I hired a dance troupe to do this dance that they did, but then I photographed it the way I wanted to photograph it and disassembled it. And then in the editing room and live by switching from camera to camera. And then I also split the screen live, put it back together and took it apart. And anyway,
that's awesome.
But I didn't know, at the time, the professor's like, Don, how did you do that? She goes, how could you even see like that? She said, and then she asked me the questions of typical, like, do you have trouble reading? I'm like, oh yeah, numbers and letters jump all around, P and D and Q are all the same letter to me, they just happen to be in different positions. And she's like, oh yeah, well, and then she talked about some other famous people being dyslexic. And I was like, oh, well, I'm basically out of school now. So I guess I'm safe, because I did have trouble reading and all those things. Thank God I could make movies for book reports.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, it's so just some people, I guess you don't know it because you don't know if other people are dealing with the same thing and you don't want to ask. So that's...
and thank God they tested us for vision because I didn't actually wear glasses until I started to drive, and I always thought that when people looked up in the sky and saw stars, I always thought that was like a National Geographic photograph, like you couldn't do that. And come to find out, my first pair of glasses, I was like, oh my God, you can see the stars. What?
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it there was a sort of an aha moment there.
Yeah. So what is the process for you? Like when you get on a job, let's say like when you're a set director, like what is the first thing you do? Is it meet with the producers, reviewing the script and jotting down like how you would take it? Like what's usually, I know it's different with every director and producer, but
it's kind of the same. So as a set decorator, and I'll repeat it 3 times, set decorator, because everybody gets it wrong. We are the set decorator, not the set director, because we decorate. And it's a joke. I have to tell you, I belong to the Set Decorator Society of America, and people get it wrong all the time. We're always correcting people in the press, like Variety, who should, by the way, know. So the first thing you do is someone calls you. Usually it's the designer. It's usually that's how you get the job. And so the designer calls you and says, okay, we're going to do this show. Let's say Kidding, the show I did with Jim Carrey and Michelle Gondry.
Yeah.
And that it's, we're going to do 15 episodes of this TV show. It's, somewhat magical realism and based in Ohio, where Jim Carrey plays a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood kind of character. And you come to find out by reading the script, okay, there are the sets that are on-camera sets, which is the children's show. And then there is his crumbling life. And they don't, and so then you meet with the designer and the director, and they talk about how they want the feeling to be. Very often they don't talk always about look or specific colors or things like that. We start talking about what's the feeling and how do we want to communicate, and then as the production designer and I know, or probably the cinematographer, tricks on how to communicate that, right? And so then the designer usually starts a few weeks before me. Will have drawings and what I call tear sheets, which is, we used to tear images out of magazines. Now you pull things from Pinterest or any other source. And so Max would start out with these board, we call them boards. They're look boards, and so that's also how you sell the studio on the show. So I might contribute imagery and they contribute imagery. We do a little what we call a dog and pony show for the studio. Like, this is what the sets on camera are going to look like. And this is what the sets in the rest of Ohio are going to look like. And then they, say, okay. And then they say, go. And you spend, some time putting together a budget so that you don't have a biodome yet. And then I do what's called breakdowns, and in my budget I basically break everything down. I just list everything. So in Jeff's sad apartment or in the television studio, I'll list everything. I'll list the television cameras, the backings, because I'm in show business, I know what a film studio looks like. We were building, this is like bringing sand to the beach. We're building a soundstage. But that's showbiz all over. And so I'm making that breakdown. And then if I don't know the prices on things, I guess. And so you do initial budgets and all that. And then while you're doing that, your team usually have some buyers, and the buyers are assistant decorators, basically. And you give them the list of the things that we're looking for most urgently, the things that are hard to find, maybe things that we have to buy and ultimately we'll have to paint or whatever. So they start out and they've got several weeks of trying to find or will find these things, and you put them on hold. In Hollywood, there are prop houses, and in each prop house, there's a system on how you reserve a piece of furniture, and we call it tagging furniture. And so you dash in person around Los Angeles, on the Valley side, on the Hollywood side of the hill, tagging furniture and photographing, lots and lots of furniture, and coming back with ideas. And what happens during that process is you start to see the movie build itself. And you're part of the movie, right? So, I start focusing on light fixtures, or I start focusing on colors, or I start focusing on weird textures that I want to combine, or I'll do an entire trip downtown just swatching fabric, because I'm going to upholster things and so on. And so then you start, so then you've got your folders together, and you show and tell again with the directors and the producers, and again, after you've kind of turned in a budget, it's just given that you're going to stay on budget unless you let them know otherwise. So that conversation is over with. And now it's about the specifics. And now the director says, I want to do this shot, and I want to do this shot. And how are we going to figure that out? And by the way, we want to do this in episode 6. And you don't have the script for that yet, but we're going to give you this heads up on that. So you get the chance to, I should work that into the set in episode 2, right? And, in film, you get the script ahead of time, which is genius, right? But in television, they sort of parse it out in episode 1, and there's secrets. And the writer's room is a whole bunch of chaos that I'm glad I'm not involved with, because they really do have to figure it out. So then you start. So meanwhile, the production designer and the art directors are having the sets built. The construction coordinator has bid this job as well, hired a crew, painters, carpenters. They start building these sets, and then usually it goes. The construction finishes, painters come in. As painters are finishing, set decorators coming in with their crew, and concurrently with the set decorators coming in is the electricians, and the electricians are firing up all the practicals, which is what we call light fixtures. Because most film now is digital, and in a lot of shows, set decorators are literally lighting the set. That all the source of light is stuff I'm supplying. And that may not be everything. Like there's a window in front of me right here. That window is supplying a good amount of light, but I have a table right here. I might have a little accent light back there. What happens is the DP and the decorator try to be hand in glove about that. Like, I'm kidding. There was one thing where Sean, the DP, wanted to have lights look at the camera. He wanted to have, like, back here, he just wanted to have a bulb, and he often did it. So it got this glare, and it was like an emotional, sort of irritating, disturbing kind of thing that again is part of the vocabulary of film, where you find something that's going to help us get that mood and so on. So, and then once you're rolling, you're just rolling. You just stay ahead of the schedule, the steamroller, which is production. So they just finished Jeff's apartment and they're on their way to the studio, and you're trying to finish that up and still prep next week's episode, and then have talking about what's in production meetings, what's coming in episode 6. So as a department head, you're kind of both an artist and a manager, very much so, and very much part of the creative process, which is why I stuck with it. Because coming out of film school thinking I'm going to be a director, I realized I think I have a lot to take care of. I watch these television directors, like how many people come up to them with a question about next week's episode, and they're trying to talk to an actress and talk to the DP, and it would make me cross-eyed.
Has there ever been like a certain item that was called for that was like difficult to get, or like a last minute change that you had to like frantically change anything?
That happens every week. Yeah, that
It does,
does.
yeah.
And it does. And I have to say, Doug, thank God I've been working in Hollywood, because we do have the support of the prop houses and all of our vendors. Like, again, in kidding, I had to do a CAT scan. In one of the episodes, they goes through the CAT scan, and we had to find a working CAT scan. Well, because we have specialty prop houses, I knew that was in the script, and I went to them ahead of time. This place called Alpha Medical, and reserved the CAT scan like 2 months in advance, because
Yeah.
we wanted a certain look on a CAT scan, because it had to have this round shape. There's other ones, but we were doing a match shot of like basically a donut shot that was a match cut to something else. So early on, for the DP and Michel Gondry, the director, you have to have that thing there on the day of shooting. So I was like, okay, let's make sure we reserve the CAT scan. But I think, like, again, I have a story about when I was on the Santa Claus 3. They had shot the first 2 Santa Clauses in Canada, and when they came here, we vowed to make this the best looking Santa Claus out of the 3 films. And we did Santa's kitchen, and I made everything in there. There's a crazy amount of like, what I called like a Hoosier cabinet on steroids, and there was this goofy scene with this cappuccino machine that gets broken, and it's made out of all these weird kludge shapes. And again, it's a children's film, so it has a different vocabulary. But I had forgot to get the dining room chairs, and all the legendary figures, which is like the bunny rabbit, Easter bunny, and the tooth fairy, and Mother Nature, all had to sit down. And within a few days, I was like, oh my God, how did I forget the chairs? And I dashed away from the studio and went to one of my favorite sources. And I bought 2 different sets of dining room chairs and brought them back and apologized to the production designer. And he took pictures of them. And I said, I have to get them upholstered. And he said, get them upholstered. When they come back, I'm going to have the painters paint them so they all kind of match. And he did a very cute, we had inspiration from Mary Blair. Mary Blair was one of Walt Disney's women animator artists. Like, she kind of came up with the idea for It's a Small World. So the look of small, have you been to Disneyland, seen that?
Yeah. Disney World, yeah.
Yeah, so she was responsible. So that was part of one of the artists that we were emulating. And so he ended up painting these last minute chairs that I got to look a very kind of Mary Blair kind of cute vocabulary. Sweet.
Yeah. No, I was trying to think, is there's got to be sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, we need this, and it's like impossible to get that.
Or volume. Sometimes they ask for such volume of things.
Oh yeah.
And you are trying to figure it out. Again, on Santa Claus, it was we have this concern in film mostly about artwork, but sometimes it's about other objects where it has to be cleared. You can't just use this painting that's behind me. You have to get a clearance from the artist that says it's okay.
Oh, okay.
That's another mountain of work. It is enormous amount of work. So there are prop houses in LA that just specialize in artwork that's cleared. But anyway, on Santa, there's a sequence where the conveyor belts in Santa's workshop. Again, I had to supply conveyor belts, moving the toys to each of these little stations where little elves are making, things out of wood and things out of metal. And these were stuffed animals, but these stuffed animals couldn't be copywritten stuffed animals. So I couldn't be using Winnie the Pooh or even a traditional teddy bear. I was finding Chinese ripoffs in downtown LA. Enormous district in downtown LA called the Toy District. It's right next to the Bong District. Downtown has everything, but anyway, so I would leave downtown with my car jammed with as many toys as I get, because we were constantly altering toys to accommodate whatever the sequence was. And so again, it's like cleared toys, hundreds and hundreds of them, and here's the color palette. So that's like painting you into a corner where you're like, It has to be all those things, and it has to be here in 2 days. And, lots of times in film, which is typical of production, is, yeah, everybody's, oh, you can find it online. Yeah. And how many days is it going to take to get here? I need it tomorrow.
I know. No, I never thought of the cleared thing. Like, I always think of that in movies. Sometimes you see like a prominent company, not like a big one, but you'll see like a ketchup bottle and it's like Heinz. And I'm like, they have to like get the okay from Heinz, right?
There are two things. So and especially what's happening in the 80s and 90s, this thing called product placement.
So 80s, 90s, it was everywhere. Yeah.
Everywhere. So those people would all, like, a product placement house would have a stable of, Nabisco and General Mills and a Sony or whatever kind of electronics, and they'd have a little from column A and column B, so that you would call them and say, okay, I need to have a soda on camera. And this is what they mostly say is, oh, just turn the label away from camera. And like, no, the director wants to see it. They think it's better if it's real. And so these product placement houses are there to support us. And they jump through hoops to make this kind of stuff happen. Thankfully, they exist also in hand in glove here in Los Angeles because, you can send a truck. Like, okay, now I need not Apple computers. Like, you might distinguish between two characters in your movie. Yeah. These are Apple kind of people and these are Dell kind of people. And,
yeah.
I mean, that's weird shit that we go through to sort of flesh out a character.
That's great. When you think about that, there's so many times you can see a scene like somebody goes into their bedroom. They go into, like, a kid goes into their bedroom, and you basically, like, before they even speak, you can like know so much about them. So no, that's so cool. It's so much goes into it. And I love that you did that inner dialogue to yourself. When you would pick up objects at like a thrift shop when you're younger. That's great.
Yeah. We joke in my department is that dialogue is off screen and camera is hovering on set dressing. Because that's almost never the case. I always call it the big fat actor head, because then you suddenly don't see any of the set. But, you see it in the wide shot, you see it in the walk and talk, you see plenty of the sets, but we jokingly talk about that because
I bet, yeah.
And sometimes, sometimes, like, I went again. I'm teaching, and we took the students to Warner Brothers, and ran into his decorator. We know Richard Walker, and he's doing Young Sheldon, and he took him through the set. Like, oh, hey, it was completely one of those moments that never happens in like real life. And all these people who are looking up to you, students, and we're like, oh, there's somebody I know. Let's go walk through the sets of Young Sheldon, which. The producers might watch this video and be like, I didn't approve that.
Yeah, I didn't. Anyway,
and I pointed out to the students, I'm like, see how dense these sets are and how many times maybe something's repeated or it sort of feels like we see the same idea. We do that because we don't know, for some characters, what's going to be on the shot. And you want to make sure you set up this character that might only have 2 walls behind them, and you want to establish who they are. Or what we'd call color coding characters, where you have certain palette of colors that helps the audience identify who the character is, because maybe this whole sequence is just on this phone, and this Dawn character is in this mushroom colored room, and the other characters in a light blue room, and in these sets for Young Sheldon. It was a perfect way of being able to illustrate that, because it really felt like, oh, there's an awful lot of art in this room for this, but you want to make sure that there's something behind the character that helps basically tell the story.
Yeah, no, that's so true. No, that's great that you mentioned Young Sheldon. I want to, because obviously when you're working on film, you're there from the beginning. I would say for the most part. I'm sure there's times that some other guy didn't work out and they brought somebody else in. I don't know if that ever happened, but I'm sure that happens. But like doing like a TV spot, how is that different than when you're going in and having to keep a feel for the show? Is it just, do you talk to the guy that was there the week before? Do you watch old episodes? How does that work?
Yes. So you're talking about like if you're doing an episode on a show?
Yeah, like if you do an episode like Jane the Virgin, I know you worked on a few of those.
Yeah. Yeah, and
and
that again,
community. So yeah.
so yes, exactly. That's a perfect example. Thank you for even noticing that. I would have forgot. So Jane the Virgin was easily established before I got there, and so what Jane's look is, and what her colors were, and Cynthia Charette. When I did the Jane the Virgin, they had hired Cynthia Charette, a designer I did a couple of shows with, and she and
Okay.
I slowly ticked the look a different direction. And again, because they hired her, we figured that you want a little of Cynthia and Dawn, and so we did that. So you start off with absolutely for continuity, and so the whole show can cut together, keeping it the same. But what we did is slowly, the Marabella, I think is the name of the hotel, we started to sort of update the Marabella a little bit, and so it's not that you have to pee in every corner so you can say, oh, I was here and this is, now it's my set.
Yeah.
I've done plenty of shows. When I did X-Files, a lot of those sets were established before I got there. They were established in Canada. And so you have to follow that. And so, yeah, you have continuity photographs. When you do a show, you shoot your own continuity set photos. The on-set dresser shoots continuity photographs. The still photographer, if there's a publicist on set, they shoot photographs and sometimes they see the set. So you have a good amount of evidence to put it back together. When I did Community, that TV show, Denise Pizzini was the set decorator, and then she was bumped up to become production designer. And she brought me on because we had worked together as the set decorator. Many of the permanent sets were there, so I didn't have to do anything to them until something was written in. And so I was just maintaining the permanent sets with the same crew that had been there before me, her crew. And then I started to do my version of what, the crazy episodes were calling for, including Pillows and Blankets.
It's like a puzzle. It's such an interesting, you have to have a special eye for that, like getting a photo of a set and then putting it together, standing back. That's got to be, I'm sure it gets frustrating, but it's kind of fun.
Well, that part's almost like forensics too,
Yeah.
A lot of our job is like a lot of things. It's psychology, it's anthropology, it's all kinds of strange sort of, I think of what I do is sort of assemblage, like making collage or assemblage, because you're taking different elements and putting them together. And those same elements, or if you change out 3 of those elements, suddenly it means a different thing.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of, because you might rent the same chair again, 3 times in Hollywood. But depending on what the other objects you're surrounding it with, it's communicating a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
That's the strength of it too.
No, it's fascinating. Just like you said, the psychology that goes into even just putting all that together.
Yeah. And we, again, we sort of nerd out on things like, light fixtures or,
yeah, sure,
that stuff, because, to us, we've done it before. And sometimes, I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to use that couch again, so
yeah,
what can I do? And I've sort of got into, for many shows, either out of necessity or out of ego, I want to reupholster some furniture. Even if it's the prop house's furniture, you get permission to hey, I'm going to update your furniture, or it's going to match the color coding that we're doing for this character, or your sofa looks a little dirty, and that's a real way of sort of individualizing your furniture too, is that, maybe you can't afford to be buying every piece of furniture, but for this sequence, you can, do a quick reupholstery job. Again, the studios jump when you say jump, when we walk in, like all the furniture I had reupholstered on the Muppets, all of it. I said in one production meeting, I said, every time a Muppet sits down and an upholsterer earns his wings, because there's a hole cut in every piece of furniture, so the puppeteers, underneath it. So, that became like, that was a whole big education, both the Muppets I did in 2015 and then this one we just did a few years ago, 2022, is you have to think ahead on I ask in every production meeting, are they going to sit down? Do they sit?
Yeah. Yeah, I interviewed Bruce Lanoil, who works on both of those. He
I
worked on
love
the Muppets,
Bruce.
yeah, Bruce is cool.
I didn't watch his interview. I didn't get that far, but I will.
Yeah, no, he was really cool. Yeah, he grew up in like Jersey for a little bit, or right on the border of New Jersey, and that's where I'm at. But no,
Right.
he was super awesome. So one thing I have to ask is, you kind of mentioned like the personalization when you're reupholstering. Have you ever put anything in the background that was like a personal touch or something that meant something to you? Do you know what I mean? Like when people hide
yeah, I did
things.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes we do it on bulletin boards. But again, my early films, I would always include a fish on the set.
What do you mean by a fish? Like a mounted fish?
Or a picture of a fish, or a ceramic fish.
That's great.
There's lots of ways you can, if you're clever, you can get a fish on the set. It could be an
That is
ashtray,
awesome.
But I think what we do for personally, generally, and sometimes it's out of necessity, is harvest stuff from home for bulletin boards or filler in the junk drawer. And so, my older brother called me Savey Saver because I'm a collector and I save a lot of things. And so you asked, do you have stuff? You often ask your guests if they have stuff for movies. I'm like,
yeah.
I have an entire basement full of stuff for
movies. You
have
everything?
I mean, not everything, because I also don't want everything. I have a certain sense of taste. But, I also have in the basement, in bins, stuff I think I'm going to use on a show. And so I have like vintage this and some weird telephone books and While You Were Out pads from the 1970s. And so I like to layer sets so they have a history in them. And so I collect ephemera and weird things from different eras to salt in. And so I let my crew know, oh, I'm bringing a bin of stuff. And they kind of roll their eyes because now that's one more thing that returned to Don. So yes, a lot of times, I don't think I put family photographs in usually, but I've almost always put pictures of like my cats because I've had cats over the years.
Oh, cool.
I mean, because you're just looking for things like, you got some secretary, she's got a bulletin board. She doesn't even get a line, but, maybe it's the camera starts on the phone ringing and no one's answering the phone, and pull back and there's her schedule and whatever, some tickets on the bulletin board or whatever. And then there's a picture of one of my cats.
That is awesome. That's great. I got to go back because, it's so funny whenever I interview people, it's like you're going through their IMDb and you're thinking about movies. So this is not a joke, Don. I was saying them out loud, the movies that you worked on, like when Jamie reached out to me. And I'm like saying the movies, and I said Soul Man. And I'm like, man, he worked on Soul Man. And she goes, what was Soul Man? And I like explained it to her. She could not believe that it was a real movie. She thought I was like joking with her. And then I let her watch the trailer of it. And she was like, oh my God, I can't believe they made that movie.
At the time, we thought that was a little bit,
oh my God, yeah,
inappropriate. And, and I would love to hear what Ray Dong Chong has to say now, because she was certainly enlightened then. And, it was a break for her maybe, or at least it was a job, but what a stupid kind of concept. But, that's what those films were. We were a little more innocent and whatever back then.
C. Thomas Howell, man, he was, he did a lot of movies. Like, he's still working today. Like, he's a busy guy, but I wonder at that point if he had somebody that just said, take whatever, because I bet he could have held out for like whatever movie. Because out of all those guys in The Outsiders, he was great. Like, he's a great actor in that movie.
Right. I think, I don't think until we got into it, we realized we were on a slippery slope. I mean, when he walked out of the makeup room with that makeup on, you're like, okay, wait, what's going on here?
What's happening right now? Yeah.
Man. And you know what? Maybe it would play today. I don't know. I mean, it's so off, that maybe it would.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen it in so long, but I love his movies. Like, he's one of those guys. I'll go back and watch a lot of his a lot of those like 80s, 90s movies because he's so good. But that's so interesting. So when you're doing this, you're on set every day? Because obviously
No,
it's like, or you're not on set. You're on the next set,
unless
probably,
I'm the
right?
on-set dresser, I'm not on set.
Okay.
I always say if I'm on set, something's going wrong. No, I open the set in the morning. So if it's a new set, and we're, in one end of town and the studio's in the other end of town, and let's say I'm prepping this sound stage sets, which are, shooting tomorrow, I open the set in the morning on location, let's say in Glendale, make sure that everything is there and that the director and the DP like it. And then I communicate anything that's like, let's say there's a passage of time or there's a stunt. And I okay, all the stunt furniture that I had built is over here. Or when we get to, the dinner scene, all the plates and dishes are staged over here on this cart. And then bye. And, and it used to be before cell phones, is when we left, like really? People trusted us. Like, okay, Don's going to go and do his job. The on-set dresser is doing his job. And now, it's gotten, film production still runs pretty quick, right? You got to get a lot of stuff done. So you have to be pretty efficient. So they aren't usually going to call and say, hey, we hate your chair. We don't come back and get a new chair. They know how long that'll take. Generally, the AD, the first assistant director, knows that. So what I've learned is to supply extra somethings that I think, I always have what I call premonitions, and what I think that maybe they're not going to like. Like, if I want to give them several of their light fixtures. I might give them a couple extra pieces of art in case this one's got too much white in it or it's too whatever. Because sometimes when I address a set, I have extra stuff because you don't know where everything's going. You get into the space and you figure it out. I never have been the person to know exactly where every single thing goes. We have to do what's called the director's plan, and then the more, for each set. And so the set designer, the one who's drawing the plans, the basic architect of these sets, gives you a blank of the room, and then you're drawing in, okay, couch, 2 chairs, lamp, whatever it is. And then I share those very often with the DP, saying lamp, light fixture, light source. And then maybe they get published when we go on a tech scout. And on a tech scout, you get, I call them fun packs, but it's a stapled together thing. And it has a drawing of every single plan of every set. So here's her bedroom. Here's the hallway to her bedroom. Here's the whatever other sets. And so in those, if it's important, I will draw in the key things. Here's the chair that gets broken in scene 4. Here's the light fixture. Here's the light switch that Jane turns on when she comes at, the light switch. So people don't have any questions about it. And or on the tech scout, they look at it and they're like, oh no, I want her to come in that door because this is how we're shooting. I'm like, okay, erase it or change it. Boom. You reestablish the plan. So no, I'm not on set. People are always like, oh, you worked with Elizabeth Taylor, you worked with so-and-so, you worked with so-and-so. I'm like, I was on the same show as them and I supplied a bed for Elizabeth Taylor, but I did not she's not my best pal. I have no relationship with the actors. And like I say, if I'm on set, something's gone wrong. I need to be working.
That's
I'm always looking ahead. Well, I do.
No, that's what you got to do. No, I was going to ask if you just the timing of like your careers, Tim Robbins, if you bumped into him on Pick a Destiny. I'm guessing.
Yes. And that, because it was a small movie. Yes.
Yeah.
And John Cusack. And, because of Catherine, it wasn't because they remembered me, but because my best friend was friends with all those guys, the Actors Gang people. And so, it's a small Hollywood. It really is. And you were saying that earlier. It is true. So if I don't know them, friends of my friends know them. And, we went to parties together, that kind of thing.
And then you'll know them in minutes. You'll remember so many different stories just by the friend of the friend in the situation. Yeah.
Yeah. And, because we would go to the Actors Gang Theater too. So we, that was interesting because, in film school and in theater school, they were in theater school. We were all kind of at the same strata. And then, Catherine and I start making sets, and many other people do sets for movies, and you start to see that strata separate. So, they don't want to be talking to the set decorator unless they have a problem, or unless we really were friends, they end up, and just like I do, I hang out with set decorators. I hang out with, other artists, and they hang out with other actors. And so, there isn't a lot of crossover, I would say. Actors hang out with makeup and hair people because that's who's touching their face.
Yeah.
They get to know them real well.
Yeah. So I have two. This has been so much fun. So one question, you kind of alluded to the question I always ask people at the end, but one is, do you still have the Francis Ford Coppola letter?
I do.
That's amazing.
I don't have it in front of me here, but I have it.
No, that's fine. No, that's great. And then two, because you were so nice to send the hat from Pick a Destiny, the pizza place. And I know you just mentioned you have a lot of things in the basement. What are some of like your prized possessions? Is it like your first, did you keep anything from like your first film? Like,
oh, funny. Yeah. They interviewed me for Movies That Made Us about Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't think it's in the cut, but there was a graveyard scene in there somewhere, and I kept one of the statues from the graveyard. It's still decaying in my garden. I do have one of the pics of the Pick of Destiny. I have one. I kept, I don't want everything, and some of it I let go of, but I still have some baskets because we brought in on Medicine Man, which Sean Connery and Lorraine Bracco, we brought in Brazilian native actors from the Yanomami tribe. And we bought basket because we were dressing the set. We shipped from Brazil a bunch of these baskets, these handmade baskets. And so I still had two of them. I didn't even think of it until I was having lunch today downstairs. And I was like, oh, that's from, Medicine Man. And what else do I have? I have, I watched, because of this interview, I watched House 2. And there's a sequence in the basement where Ari Gross sits on a chair. And I was like, oh, that's where those chairs came from, because they were three mismatched three chairs. They were like oak chairs. And they kind of have the spindle, the back, that kind of does a little, and no one will see it but me. But for 2 seconds, he sits on this chair. I'm like, oh, that's where that chair came from. So sometimes you end up with stuff because they're going to throw it away, and or they become a gift, like the Pick a Destiny pick was a gift.
That is so cool. I think it's so great that you had the wherewithal in the beginning, like to be like, oh, this is really cool. Like, I know you had that history before because you said you like going to thrift shops and getting old items, but I think it's really cool that you took that from the graveyard scene. I hope you had a house then, or were you lugging all of these things from apartment to apartment?
I know, because I for years always have had houses. I rented a house for years, and and then I've always had gardens. That's important to me. I always wanted to have outdoor space, and if you don't live in the middle of, well, I do live in the middle of town, but you can find garden space and be able to keep stuff. And then this house, when I bought it in 2000, it has a full basement, and I would just cram stuff in there. And, it was all stuff a lot of it is just stuff that I've collected, including I collect portraits, and have collected thrift store portraits of creepy, angry, and suspicious people. And,
really?
And I've had 2 shows of those paintings recently in the last 10 years. The name of the show is called "Who Are These People?" And
cool. So you blow them up, or are they just like you get film, or
they're bad thrift store paintings that I can't use them on the shows because they're not clear.
Yeah.
So they're just a collection, which is a weird collection to have of other people's. They're everywhere. This is a bust of somebody I don't know. You can't really see it well.
Really?
But I
can see it. That's awesome.
And so I've been collecting these portraits forever. And some of the very first portraits came out of an attic set on House 1. Because I remember I got 4 of them from the decorator, because she was going, Don, do you want these? Because a lot of stuff gets thrown away. Because those non-union movies, they weren't established with a studio, so it all went in the dumpster, or you sent it to the thrift store. And since I'm savvy saver, I didn't let anything go. I could afford not to. But also so just weird bins of, like I said, old vintage stuff that I might use on a show that I just think I'll never find that again.
Yeah, no, that's true. No, especially even like the message pad, like answering.
While you're out, pads.
Because people don't have used that anymore, so it might be hard to get. That's good. That's a smart thing to do.
Yeah, and you know what it was is that I remembered them from my childhood. I remember secretaries having that and tearing off that little note and here, Mr. Baxter, while you were out, you got a call.
Yeah,
and those kinds of things. Again, I'm drawing on my memory because I'm a pretty visual person and have observant about things in the world, and I have that visual, and I'm like, okay, you always just draw on what you know, and so that's I would end up on a bulletin board while you were out.
No, that's so cool. Now, Don, this has been so much fun. I gotta ask, did your brother ever get into film? Was he in Hollywood too, or?
No, he got a degree from San Francisco State, and again, we made these spook houses. And we used to make monsters for our spook houses, and we would take castings of our faces, like out of plaster.
Yeah.
And he segued into being a sculptor. And so wow. He spent his career sculpting plaster and renovating Victorian homes in San Francisco, taking molds off of things and then casting multiples of it, much like these faces we did for the spook house.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, he went a whole nother creative direction. Yeah, it's funny because, he didn't even want to come down to LA. And, like I said, I didn't apply anywhere other than UCLA. So, and then I stayed here, I moved here and stayed here. It was a good fit, but he's made a whole career out of
I bet, especially there. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool that from the spook houses, you both are doing something with it within that, that's really neat. That
he was doing always the mechanical part.
Oh man, Don, this has been so much fun. I'm so happy we were able to do this, and thanks for sending me that. That was so cool.
I love your show, so I'm honored to do this. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Don. And this will be out probably the next month. I'll shoot you an email when the link comes out so you can check it out. And thanks so much for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome. This has been great.
Don, Soul Man, we talked early on, and even then it was like, this is not cool. But how about the fact that he has like the headstone from Nightmare on Elm Street, and just the fact he left his art out? Someone saw it, and is this yours? And he's like, oh crap, I didn't mean to leave that there. I'm sorry. It's like, no, you're going to the art department, and the rest is history. So cool. Thank you, Don, if you're listening to this right now. Thank you for everyone for listening, and your homework, House 2, The Second Story, will be a lot of fun. One of those movies I saw when I was a kid, and I can't wait to talk about it again. There's some good cast members. Laura Park Lincoln is in it. She plays the Carrie-like character in Friday the 13th Part 7, which is weird. We were talking about that last week, because Billy Butler was in Friday the 13th Part 7, and that plot of Ginger Dead Man 3 is pretty much Friday the 13th Part 7, which is also part Carrie. Whew, I'm out of breath. So don't forget to review, rate, share our podcast. Follow us on all social media at Sequels Only. And don't forget to check out our website, sequelsonly.com. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, guys.